I thought it was just a snow-covered log until the tail moved." Those were the first words I said when the news crew asked how I found him. I still can't believe any of this happened in our quiet little town of Hartsville, population just under 900 and proud of it. It's the kind of place where everyone knows your name, where you nod to the same truck passing your porch every morning, and where if something unusual happens, it becomes the talk of the town for months. But what happened that winter morning? That became the kind of story people would whisper about for years. The snowstorm had rolled in fast, real fast. We get our share of snow in upstate New York, sure, but this one felt different, colder, angrier. The kind of storm that rattles windows and humbles you. I had just stepped out to shovel the walkway when I saw it, or rather him. A shape slumped in the ditch near the edge of the woods, so still I figured it was firewood blown off a truck, or maybe a chunk of something fallen from the trees. But the tail flicked, slow and low. I dropped the shovel and ran. It was a dog. A shaggy, medium-sized mix of something, looked part shepherd, part retriever, but you could tell he'd been out in the weather a while. His fur was caked in ice, and his paws were bleeding through packed snow. He didn't even lift his head when I knelt beside him. "Hey there, buddy," I whispered, barely hearing myself over the wind. "You with me?" No response, but his breathing was shallow and steady. I took off my coat and wrapped him in it, hoisting his limp body into my arms as best I could. I hadn't carried anything that heavy since my son Derek was a toddler, and even then Derek didn't squirm like a half-frozen dog with a mysterious object tied to his tail. That was the second thing I noticed, after the bleeding paws and the ice crusting his snout. There was something tied to his tail. At the time, I thought it was maybe a branch or some trash he got tangled in. But no, it was fabric, tightly knotted, almost deliberately. I couldn't unwrap it until I got him warmed up. Back at the cabin, I threw more logs into the stove and set him on a pile of towels by the fire. My wife, Carol, nearly dropped her coffee when she saw me burst in carrying what looked like a soaked mop. "Earl, what in the world is that?" "Dog," I said. "Found him in the ditch. He's alive. Barely." Carol, always the first to jump into action, started gathering warm water, blankets, and the first aid kit. I stayed with the dog, rubbing his sides, whispering to him. No collar, no tags. But that thing tied to his tail kept gnawing at me. When his breathing steadied and his body stopped shivering, I gently worked at the knots. The fabric was soaked, but it came free eventually. It was a child's mitten, pink, with a stitched blue star, and tucked inside it, a note. Not just paper. A torn page from a spiral notebook. Crumpled, damp, but legible. "Help. My name is Annie. We're in the cabin, please. I don't know where my dad went." I stared at the note for a long minute, the fire popping and crackling behind me. Carol stood behind my shoulder, silent. Then she whispered, "Do you think it has to be recent?" I said. She wouldn't have tied this unless she thought someone might see it. Carol went into motion, grabbing the phone to call the sheriff's office while I wrapped the dog in another dry towel. He lifted his head for the first time then, brown eyes cloudy but full of something. Not panic, not pain, purpose. I swear to this day that dog wanted us to read that note. Sheriff Donovan showed up in less than 20 minutes. That's fast for our town, and faster still given the snow. He came with Deputy Harris in a four-wheel drive that looked more like a snowplow than a cruiser. "You say you found this note tied to his tail?" Donovan asked, reading it again, slowly. A child's handwriting. "Any idea what cabin she could be talking about?" "There are a few summer cabins up the ridge," I said. "Mostly vacant this time of year, but some folks do use them for winter getaways." He nodded. "We'll check them. Can you show us where you found the dog?" Carol put a hand on my arm. "Earl, let them handle it. You're not a young buck anymore." I started to protest, but Sheriff Donovan spoke first. "Actually, it'd help if you came. You know those woods better than anyone." So I bundled up again, grabbed a flashlight and a thermos of coffee Carol shoved into my hands, and we headed out. The snow hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten worse. The cruiser carved a fresh trail through powdery drifts, the tires growling against the unpaved road. We reached the spot where I'd found the dog, and from there, Donovan followed my boot prints through the woods. It took us nearly an hour to reach the first cabin. Empty. The second one, too. But the third one, about a mile further in, had a chimney still letting out a thin wisp of smoke. "Looks like someone was here recently," Harris said, stepping up to the porch. Donovan knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. Then he looked at me. "You sure this is safe?" "As safe as it gets out here." He turned the knob. It was unlocked. We stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Wood smoke, sweat, and something else, like stale food. The place looked tossed. Bags on the floor, a torn jacket draped over the couch. And then I saw the sleeping bag. She couldn't have been more than 9, lying curled up inside, cheeks pink from the cold, but breathing. "Annie," I said softly, kneeling beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. "Did you find Max?" she whispered. I nodded. "He found us." The girl broke into a smile so pure it melted the cold right out of my chest. Sheriff Donovan radioed for paramedics while Harris went to check the rest of the cabin. Annie's face lit up when we told her Max was safe and warm. She clutched the pink mitten still on her other hand. "Where's your dad, sweetheart?" Donovan asked gently. "He went for help 3 days ago," she said. "We were on a trip. He never came back." They found him later that day, injured, disoriented, but alive, about 2 miles south near an overturned snowmobile. Apparently he had tried to walk out and slipped down a slope. Annie had survived alone, using what he taught her. But it was Max who made the difference. Back at our cabin, Max was sitting up now, eating small bites of boiled chicken. He wagged his tail when he saw Annie walk through the door, still wrapped in a rescue blanket. The two of them hugged like neither had ever let go. That night, Carol and I sat in the living room long after the sheriff left, long after the storm started to die down. We watched Max curl up at Annie's feet as she dozed off by the fire. "That dog saved her life," Carol whispered. "More than that," I said. "He saved ours, too. He reminded us what people and dogs are capable of when it matters." And I still believe it, because sometimes hope doesn't come wrapped in big speeches or flashing lights. Sometimes it comes wagging its tail with a mitten full of miracles. Max didn't just bring a note. He brought us a reason to get up the next morning. That's what I told Carol when we woke up to another thick layer of snow blanketing the yard. It had been 2 days since we found Max and Annie, and already our quiet life had taken on a new rhythm. Max had claimed the corner near the fireplace as his own, and Annie, still shy but full of quiet strength, spent her days helping Carol in the kitchen or curled up reading books we'd dug out from the attic. The cabin hadn't been this lively in years, not since Derek left for college, and the house grew a little too quiet for 2 old folks and a dog bowl that stayed empty. We'd never filled it again, until now. That morning, I noticed Max pacing near the door. He wasn't whining or barking, just moving in circles like he had somewhere he needed to be. Annie, now wrapped in one of Carol's thick flannel shirts, followed his movement with careful eyes. "He wants to go back," she said quietly. "Back where, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked at me. To the woods. He keeps doing that when he wants to show me something. Carol and I exchanged glances. The snow was deep, but manageable now. The worst of the storm had passed, and there was sunlight breaking through the branches outside for the first time in days. You think there's something else out there? Annie gave a small shrug, but Max barked once and pawed at the door. Carol rested a hand on my arm. You're not seriously thinking of following that dog again, are you? I smiled, already pulling on my boots. Worked out all right last time. Carol sighed, then reached for the thermos. Take this, and be careful. Annie insisted on coming with us. I hesitated, but when I looked into her eyes, clear, steady, and far older than her years, I couldn't say no. Max waited patiently as we bundled up and stepped out into the sunlight-streaked woods. We followed him for nearly a mile through the trees, the snow crunching beneath our boots. Annie kept pace beside me, her hand resting lightly on my coat sleeve. Max paused occasionally to check that we were still behind him, then trotted on, tail high. Finally, we reached a small rise near the creek. Max stopped, ears perked, and barked once. He walked to a thick patch of brambles and began to dig. There's something under there, I said, kneeling. It took a good 10 minutes of pushing aside branches and clearing snow before I saw it, a backpack, half frozen, wedged under the bushes. I tugged it free and opened the main pocket. Inside was a bundle of clothes, a flashlight, a thermos long since empty, and a small photo album. I opened it carefully. The first picture was of Annie, maybe 5 or 6, sitting on a porch swing next to a man with the same bright eyes. Her dad, I guessed. Page after page of snapshots, birthday parties, camping trips, goofy faces smeared with ice cream. Then there was a final picture, tucked into the back cover. A hand-drawn map, scribbled in marker, with one word, basement. I stared at it. Do you recognize this? Annie nodded slowly. That's our old house, from before we moved. Dad said we might have to go back someday. Where is it? 3 towns over, near Terry Creek. But we left it a while ago. He said it wasn't safe anymore. Max sat down beside the backpack, tail thumping softly in the snow. It wasn't just a memory he'd led us to. It was a message. A trail her father had started, in case something went wrong. We should tell Sheriff Donovan, I said. Back at the cabin, we radioed it in. The sheriff arrived by mid-afternoon, and when he saw the photo album, he let out a long breath. That house, I remember it, he said. Belonged to the Withers family. They had a small farm, but sold it off quick after some trouble. Never knew where they ended up. He looked at Annie. Is your last name Withers? She nodded. Annie Withers. My dad's name is Jacob. Donovan's brows furrowed. There was a case, nothing too serious, just a land dispute. But Jacob disappeared before it was settled. We thought he moved out west. Seems he stayed close, I said. Donovan examined the map. You think there's something hidden at that house? I think he wanted Annie to know where to look if something ever happened. And I think Max remembers it too. That night, Carol made a roast and let Annie help with the gravy. Max lounged near the stove, his belly full, and his fur finally dry and soft. I sat by the window, watching the trees sway under the moonlight. Tomorrow, Donovan had said. We'll drive out and check the place. No sense risking it in the dark. But I had a feeling we were just getting started. Max had more to show us. And Annie's past, whatever her father had been running from, was about to catch up with the present. Carol sat down beside me and handed me a mug. You all right? Yeah, I said. Just thinking. That dog didn't just show up. He led us into something. Something bigger than just a lost child. Carol nodded. Maybe he knew we were the ones who'd listen. I glanced toward the fireplace. Max had raised his head, eyes fixed on me. For a second, I thought I saw understanding in them. Like he knew we had taken the first step down a road we couldn't walk away from. The next morning came clear and sharp. Frost shimmered on every branch, but the sun was bright and the wind had calmed. Donovan and Harris arrived in a weathered Jeep, packed with supplies. Carol insisted on packing sandwiches and 2 thermoses, one for me and one for Annie. Are you sure she should come? Donovan asked. She knows the house, I said. And if there's anything to find, she'll know where it is. Max jumped into the back seat without waiting for permission. Annie climbed in next, her arms wrapped around that same pink mitten. I sat beside her, watching the forest roll past as we headed toward whatever was waiting. The drive took just over an hour. The old Withers house stood at the end of a winding gravel road, half hidden by pines and sagging under the weight of years. The porch steps were broken, the windows clouded, but the structure still held together. Max jumped out before the car stopped and ran up to the porch. He sniffed along the boards, then circled around to the side. Basement's probably around back, Harris said, grabbing a crowbar. Annie led us to the rear of the house, where a slanted door rested against the foundation, nearly frozen shut. It took 3 of us to pry it open. Inside, the basement was dark, dusty, and smelled of old earth. Max stepped in first, then barked. A sharp sound that bounced off the walls. We followed. It wasn't just a basement. It had been used, recently. Boxes lined one wall, and in the corner sat a battered trunk. Inside was a collection of documents, photographs, and a sealed envelope marked with one word: For Annie. Donovan opened it slowly and read the first few lines aloud. If you're reading this, it means something's happened to me. I'm sorry I couldn't explain everything sooner. We sat there for nearly an hour, piecing together what we could. Jacob had been part of a legal fight over their family's land. But more than that, he'd uncovered something about the company that bought it, dumping waste, poisoning the soil. He tried to expose them. They threatened him. So he ran, with Annie, and Max. Always Max. He'd left this trail in case they needed to finish what he started. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I looked at Annie. She wasn't afraid. She looked ready. And Max? He just wagged his tail. That night, back at the cabin, Carol tucked Annie in on the pull-out couch. I set a fresh log on the fire and poured a small glass of bourbon. Max lay by the hearth, watching every move. What happens next? Carol asked. I'm not sure, I said. But we're in it now, and if Max leads the way, I'm following. The dog thumped his tail once and let out a low sigh, content as the snow fell gently outside, hiding the tracks that had brought him to us, and the truth he was still guiding us toward. You said the name was Kelridge, right? I asked, squinting down at the dusty folder. That's the same company that tried to buy the mill back in '09. Sheriff Donovan nodded. Yep, and when folks refused, they packed up and left town, but not before there were rumors of dumping runoff in Terry Creekin. The envelope Jacob had left behind for Annie was stuffed with more than words. There were photos, handwritten notes, receipts, copies of emails, maps with circles drawn in red. To anyone else, it might have looked like a man unraveling. But to me, it looked like someone preparing for the worst, hoping someone would pick up where he left off. Annie had fallen asleep again on Carol's lap. Max was curled at her feet, his head rising slightly every time she stirred. The storm had passed, leaving a strange quiet outside, the kind that blankets the world in stillness and makes even the air seem thoughtful. "You think this is worth taking to the state?" I asked quietly. Donovan rubbed his jaw. "It's more than worth it, but we need to tread carefully. If Kelridge still has strings around here, rattling them could get someone hurt." I looked down at the folder. "Then we need someone they can't push around. Someone already used to being overlooked." That night, I stayed up going over every sheet. Carol brought me tea and a blanket and didn't say a word when she found me still at the table past midnight. She just kissed my cheek, looked over at Max, and said, "You'll take care of him if this stirs up trouble, won't you?" Max thumped his tail against the floor once, slow and firm. That dog might not have understood our words, but he understood everything else. The next day, Donovan returned with a plan. "I've got an old contact with the County Environmental Agency," he said. "Name's Hugh Tolman, honest man. Used to fish up here before they fenced off the north banks. If anyone can sniff this out without tipping Kelridge off, it's him." We arranged to meet Tolman at the old diner outside Belmore, far enough from town that no one would raise questions. Max rode with us again, tongue lolling out the window, like he had business to finish too. Tolman was waiting in a back booth, a man with heavy eyebrows and eyes like a hawk's. He looked at the papers for 10 minutes straight before he said a word. "This is damning," he muttered, "and thorough. But if I go near it officially, they'll know. Kelridge has ears in Albany." "Then what do you suggest?" Donovan asked. "You said there's a child involved." Tolman turned to me. "Her name's Annie. She's the one Jacob was trying to protect. That dog brought her to us." "Then I'd start by protecting her now, because if you stir this pot, someone's gonna come looking. Don't doubt that for a second." We drove back in silence. Max dozed in the back, but even he seemed to sense the tension. Carol met us at the door. "They called," she said, eyes flicking to Annie, who was drawing pictures of Max in the living room. "Jacob's awake, at the hospital." We drove down the same day. The hospital was 2 towns over, small, quiet, the kind of place where nurses still called you Hahn and checked your blankets twice. Jacob Withers was in room 209, hooked up to an IV and bandaged around the head, but alert. He smiled when he saw Annie. It was the kind of smile that erases years of wear in an instant. She ran to him and pressed her cheek to his chest, silent tears spilling. "You found Max," Jacob whispered. "He found us," I said. Jacob looked over. "You the man who pulled him from the snow?" I nodded. "Name's Earl. My wife and I, well, we've had a quiet life until now." He chuckled, weak but warm. "Quiet life's a rare gift. I'm sorry we brought trouble to your doorstep." "It's not trouble," I said. "It's a second chance." Jacob winced as he sat up more. "The documents, you found them?" "We did, and we took them to someone who might help. But we need more. If we're going to stop whatever Kelridge has planned, we need proof. Real proof." Jacob's jaw tightened. "There's a flash drive. In the treehouse. Back behind the old shed near our cabin. I hid it under the floorboards. Didn't want to keep it with me in case someone came sniffing around. You're sure it's still there?" "Only one who knew about it was Max. I trained him to sit near it anytime someone came close." I blinked. "You trained the dog to guard it?" Jacob nodded. "He's smarter than most people I've met. Loyal, too." We left the hospital with a new sense of purpose. That night, I laid out a plan with Donovan and Carol. We'd return to the Withers cabin at first light, search the treehouse, and secure the drive. If the documents had been enough to raise suspicions, The files on that drive might just be the nail in Kelridge's coffin. The next morning was cold but clear. Max led the way again, tail high, nose to the wind. He didn't hesitate once, trotting right to the shed and around back to the treehouse ladder. "Did he just look up?" Donovan asked. "He did," I said, squinting. "Guess it's still there." I climbed the ladder slowly, old knees creaking with each step. The treehouse was dusty but intact, floorboards dry, and under the far corner, beneath a loose plank, was a small tin box. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "Max knows where to go. If you've found this, follow him again. There's more they buried." I stared at the note, then back down at the dog. He looked up, wagged his tail once, and barked. Back in the car, Donovan plugged the drive into his laptop. We sat in stunned silence as files opened. Video clips, time-stamped emails, photos of barrels being buried near the creek, documents signed by Kelridge execs with code words for disposal routines. "They buried waste on the edge of school property," Donovan whispered. "They buried truth," I said, "but now we've dug it up." The sheriff made copies and drove the evidence straight to Tolman. Annie and Carol stayed home, baking cookies and drawing with Max, who now seemed content to nap whenever his people were safe and full. But I couldn't sleep that night. Not with what we'd seen. Not with what I knew was coming. We were going to be targets now. Kelridge wouldn't sit back while the truth walked into daylight. And we needed to be ready. "Earl," Carol whispered, joining me on the porch. "Yeah? You're not alone in this. We're with you. Max, too." I looked at the dog, who was curled up near the porch steps, ears twitching at every distant rustle. Even asleep, he was guarding. The quiet wouldn't last long, but it would be enough, for now. Tomorrow, we'd go deeper. We'd follow Max one more time. Because the truth wasn't just buried in papers and drives, it was buried in soil, behind lies, and we were the only ones willing to dig. And Max? Max was already waiting by the door. "We're being watched." Those were the first words out of Donovan's mouth the next morning as we sat around my kitchen table. He had the laptop open, files spread across the wood grain like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, but his eyes weren't on the screen. They were on the driveway. "There was a pickup parked down by the trailhead at 5 a.m., he said. "Didn't belong to anyone from town. Plates were coated in mud, and it was gone before sunrise." Carol froze by the stove. Max's ears twitched, and he rose from his corner near the fire. He moved to the front window, growled once, and sat. Still. Watching. "I've seen it too," I said. "A shadow down by the mailboxes yesterday. Thought it was just my eyes playing tricks." Donovan shook his head. "No tricks. Kelridge knows. They've known since the files started moving. My contact said there was chatter, calls placed, reports pulled. Someone's worried." "What's our move?" I asked. He tapped the screen. "We need a place to store this that's off-grid. Nothing digital, nothing traceable. And we need to get Annie and Jacob somewhere safe." Carol looked over, firm and calm. "They're not leaving. We'll protect them here." Donovan opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. He knew better than to argue with Carol when she'd made up her mind. Jacob was still at the hospital, but expected to be discharged by the weekend. He'd grow stronger by the day, but for now, he couldn't run. And Annie, she'd stopped sleeping soundly. Every creak outside made her flinch. Max hadn't left her side. That night, after we double-bolted the doors and checked the windows for the third time, I sat in the armchair with Max curled beneath my legs. I scratched the scruff behind his ears, the same way I had when I first brought him out of the storm. "You knew," I murmured. "Didn't you?" His tail thumped once. Not much, but enough. The next day, Donovan took the flash drive and a second copy of the documents to a cabin up near Widow's Hill. It belonged to an old friend of his, a trapper who'd left town years ago and didn't tell anyone he was gone. It had no electricity, no internet, and no path wide enough for a car. You had to hike to get there. "I'll stash it behind the chimney," Donovan said. "No one's finding it unless they grew up with a compass and a coal stove." When he got back, his coat was soaked through and he had twigs in his hair, but he wore a look of grim satisfaction. "It's safe. Now we wait." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stepped onto the porch with Max close behind and looked out across the trees. That's when I saw it. A light. Not bright. Flickering. Far off through the trees near the old logging road. "Come on, boy," I whispered. Max didn't hesitate. We hiked through the underbrush, quiet as the snow allowed, until we reached the bend. A fire. Small, controlled, and a man crouched beside it, writing in a notebook. He didn't hear us approach. Max stayed silent, his body tense, but steady. "Evening," I said calmly. The man froze. His hand dropped to his coat pocket. I saw the glint of metal. "No need for that," I said, raising my hands. "Just wondering what brings you to our woods." He stood slowly. Thin, long coat, leather gloves, eyes sharp. "Just passing through." "Not many pass through this deep," I replied, "especially with a fire in the open." "Cold night," Max growled. "Just once." The man turned, picked up his notebook, and tucked it into his coat. "You should go home. It's not safe out here." He vanished into the trees before I could ask another question. Max didn't follow him. He just watched. I bent down and looked at the fire pit. Half-burned papers, scribbled maps. One edge still legible. Shipment delayed, confirmed location compromised, options limited. I doused the fire and brought the paper back to Donovan the next morning. He read it, lips pressed tight. "They're watching their own people too. This isn't just cleanup, it's panic." Over the next 2 days, things escalated. First came the phone call. No number. No voice, just static. Then the tire tracks at the edge of our fence line. Then the break-in. We came back from town late afternoon to find the back door ajar. Nothing stolen. Nothing moved. Except one thing. Max's food bowl was filled with salt. That night I couldn't sleep. Neither could Carol. Or Annie. She lay on the couch with Max curled against her, his body pressed close. The message was clear. Someone wanted to scare us. They didn't want evidence. Not yet. They wanted us silent. The next day, Donovan made the call. "I spoke to Hugh. He's going to arrange a meeting with the state attorney general. We have to move fast. Bring everything. Jacob's being discharged tomorrow. We'll drive him straight to the meeting." But Max had other ideas. That afternoon, he paced near the shed again, barked, dug, then ran. Annie ran after him, and we all followed, boots crunching through the crust of old snow. He led us up the ridge, past the creek, and into a grove of old trees that I hadn't seen in years. There, buried beneath a loose patch of rocks, was a metal box. Inside, more files, more maps. and a recorder. We played it that night. Jacob's voice, clear but tired. "If something happens to me, and you find this, don't stop. This is the proof. The sounds, the voices. I wore a wire during the last meeting with Kelridge. It's all here." We listened to 20 minutes of conversation. Executives confirming dumping, talking about payoffs, talking about Jacob. "We'll bury him with the rest of the waste if he doesn't back down." Carol gasped. Annie covered her ears. Max sat, eyes locked on the recorder, unmoving. The next morning, we loaded the truck. Files, drives, copies. The recorder. Jacob, thinner but stronger, took the passenger seat beside Donovan. Carol and Annie stayed behind. I rode in the back with Max, who never blinked once. The road to Albany was long and quiet until we crossed County Line Bridge. Then came the car. Black, unmarked, fast. It pulled behind us. Didn't pass, didn't fall back, just stayed. "We're being followed," I said. Donovan nodded. "I see him." Jacob leaned forward. "Get off the main road." We took the next turn, a narrow road through the pines. The car followed. Max barked. Loud, once, then again. "We need to lose him," I said. "I know just the place," Donovan muttered. We turned down a logging path, bouncing over roots and packed snow. The car didn't follow this time. It stopped at the entrance and waited. We drove until the trees thinned. A clearing. An old ranger station, locked. But we had bolt cutters. Inside, we checked the windows. Nobody followed. Max paced the room. Every now and then he growled low, throat rattling. "They'll try again," Jacob said. "Then we stay ahead of them," I replied. We slept in shifts. Max stayed awake the whole night because he knew, we were only halfway through the storm. He won't eat until he hears her voice. That's what I told Carol the next morning after Max sniffed the roast beef sandwich I laid in front of him, then nudged it away with his nose. He hadn't touched food since we left the clearing. Hadn't laid down either. Every hour, he paced the edge of the ranger station's old wood floor, staring at the window. Every branch creak made his ears twitch. Every gust of wind made him rise from where he sat. "He's never been this on edge," I said, "even when we pulled him out of the snow." "He knows something's coming," Jacob said quietly. He was leaned up against the wall beside the stove, knees drawn up. "He always has." Donovan was outside, checking the perimeter again. The car from the day before hadn't reappeared, but it had sent a message. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And somewhere out there, someone knew we had the evidence. Jacob rubbed his temples. "We shouldn't have brought Annie into this." "She brought us into it," I said. "All of this started with her. And Max." He looked over at the dog, whose tail gave a faint wag when Jacob's eyes met his. "Still," Jacob murmured, "she's just a kid." "Yeah, a kid with more courage than half the men I've met." The plan was simple. Donovan's contact from Albany was meeting us that afternoon at a ranger substation up the mountain, closer to the city line, safer from local interference. Until then, we waited. We guarded the files, the audio, the duplicate copies of everything we'd hidden over the last 3 days. But by late morning, the snow started again. Light flurries at first, then thicker, then so heavy it blanketed the trees and turned the air to white noise. Donovan returned, snow clinging to his jacket. "We've got a problem," he said. "Road's washing out near the bend. If it keeps coming down, We won't make it to the handoff point. We need to go now, Jacob said, standing. And walk right into a trap, Donovan snapped. You think they don't know about that meeting spot? They're already one step ahead. That car yesterday? That wasn't intimidation. That was surveillance. They're hurting us. Max growled, moving to the front door. And then, before we could react, there was a knock. A slow, deliberate knock. Donovan drew his sidearm. I reached for the bat we kept near the stove. Jacob stepped back into the shadows. Max didn't bark. He stood completely still. Donovan opened the door 3 inches, just enough to speak. Who is it? Name's Grant Avery. I'm with the Bureau. You've got something I need to see. Donovan raised an eyebrow. Badge? A wallet flipped open. The ID looked real. The man behind it looked tired but alert. Wiry frame, weathered coat, and eyes that scanned everything in a second. I wasn't followed, he said, and I came through the access trail behind the ridge. They don't know I'm here. Prove it, Donovan said. I have a code phrase, Avery replied. From Hugh Tolman. He leaned close and whispered through the crack in the door. Donovan paused, then stepped back. Let him in. The agent stepped inside, brushed snow from his coat, and nodded once at Jacob. You're a hard man to find. I've had practice. They shook hands. Then Avery turned to me. You must be Earl. Depends who's asking. He cracked the slightest smile. You're stubborn. Good. Over the next 2 hours, we showed him everything. The photos, the maps, the flash drive, the audio. Max sat close the entire time, eyes never leaving the windows. When we finished, Avery leaned back and sighed. You've got more than a case. You've got enough to sink half the Kelridge board. So what's next? I asked. Now I go dark. I take this to a grand jury. You don't hear from me again unless it's safe. In the meantime, you keep your heads down. He packed the documents into a waterproof case, loaded it into a hiking bag, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he looked at Max. I've read dogs. I've trained with a few. Never met one like this. He found Annie, I said, and saved her dad. Avery nodded. He'll know when it's over. Until then, trust his instincts. And with that, he vanished into the woods. The next few days passed slow. The snow kept falling. Annie sent short messages through Carol, little notes about cookies and pictures of Max drawn in crayon. Jacob read them with a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He missed her. We all did. Then came the fire. It started at 3 a.m. We were asleep. Max woke first. Smoke. The back wall of the ranger station was burning. Fast. Donovan was up in seconds. Jacob grabbed the copies. I grabbed Max's leash, not that he needed it. He bolted straight toward the wall and barked, loud and sharp. We made it outside just before the back collapsed. No one saw who lit it. No tire tracks. No footprints. Just scorched earth and the remains of our refuge. We hiked to town by dawn. Cold. Wet. Silent. Carol took one look at us and ushered everyone inside. Annie ran to her dad. Max barked twice, nudged her shoulder, then flopped to the floor like he'd been holding his breath for a week. We're not safe here anymore, Donovan said. They're escalating, and that means they know we're close. What about Avery? Carol asked. We wait. And so we did. 3 more days passed. No word. No news. Just shadows. Just the silence of people waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then, on the 4th night, Max disappeared. I searched the entire yard, the woods, the barn. Nothing. He'd never left before. Never. Carol found the note first. It was tied to Annie's mitten, the same one Max had brought through the snowstorm weeks ago. 2 miles north, old quarry. Come alone. Bring the girl. Donovan read it twice. It's a trap. Of course it is, I said. But Max went anyway. Jacob grabbed his coat. Then I'm going too. No, I said. You stay here. I started this with Max. I'll finish it with him. But if they hurt him, they won't, I said. Because they don't understand him. He's not bait. He's the one walking them into the light. Carol kissed my cheek. Be careful. Annie hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. Bring him back. I will. I left just before sunrise. The trail was steep, the snow deep, but the air was clear. By the time I reached the quarry, the sun was rising behind the trees. And Max was waiting, tied to a post, but calm, watching. He barked once when he saw me. Then the voices came. You really walked into this? A man said, stepping out from the rocks. You really threatened a kid? I replied. He shrugged. Leverage, all business. Business is over, I said. Max pulled hard. The rope frayed. The man raised a walkie. We got him. I smiled. So do we. Donovan stepped out of the trees. Behind him, Avery. This is being broadcast, Avery said, holding up a receiver. Every word, every face, every threat. Live feed. The man's face went pale. He turned to run. Max snapped the last bit of rope. He didn't chase him. He just ran to me. And for the first time in days, he ate every bite of that roast beef sandwich. I always believed in old-fashioned justice, until I saw what one dog and a mitten could do. That's what I told the local reporter the day after the arrests. They showed up outside the cabin with a camera van, notebooks, and questions ready to be fired off like rounds at a shooting range. I wasn't in the mood for a performance, but Donovan said it was important. Let the town know what really happened before the whispers turned it into something else. So, I stood in the doorway of our cabin, Max sitting like a statue by my side, and told them the truth. Kelridge had been operating illegally for years. They'd bought land under dummy corporations, dumped waste into public water supplies, and silenced people with lawsuits and intimidation. Jacob tried to blow the whistle. They came for him. But they didn't count on Max. They didn't count on Annie. And they certainly didn't count on a couple of old-timers who weren't ready to fade into the background just yet. When I finished talking, the young reporter lowered her microphone and crouched to pet Max. He sniffed her hand, then gave her one solid lick before sitting back down, tail curled neatly around his paws. That's when I realized he'd been doing that every time we made it through another storm. Like it was his way of saying, that one's behind us. We spent the rest of the day helping Donovan pack up evidence for transfer to state agents. He brought in a secure team from Albany to collect the files. Jacob oversaw the process, checking every document before it was sealed in boxes and carried out the front door. Carol kept the kettle hot, and Annie close. The girl had drawn a picture of Max standing on a snowy hill, a mitten tied to his tail, with the words, "My hero," scribbled in crayon above it. Jacob folded it and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Going to frame that," he said. "No matter what happens." "You think it's really over?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just looked out the window. "Maybe not, but we're not running anymore." That night, Carol made stew with fresh bread, and we all sat together at the table. Donovan, Jacob, Annie, Carol, me, and Max beneath the table, keeping guard with one eye closed and the other barely open. It was the first time we'd all shared a meal without looking over our shoulders. But the next day, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived. No return address, hand-delivered. Donovan opened it with a letter opener while we all watched. It was a formal summons, not from the courts, from a private arbitration firm representing Kelridge. "They want to settle," Donovan said, "out of court." Quietly. Jacob laughed. Once, sharp. "Of course they do." "They're scared," I said. "That's what this is." Donovan agreed. "But this isn't over. Not if they're still trying to bury it. You want this to mean something, we go public. No deals. No hush money." Jacob looked at Annie, who was sitting on the rug drawing again. Max lay beside her, chin on his paws. "Then we go public," he said. For her. The following days were a whirlwind. Media vans showed up. Phone calls came in from state attorneys, environmental groups, and even former Kelridge employees who had their own stories to tell. Annie's drawing of Max was printed in the county paper alongside the headline, "The Dog Who Carried the Truth." Max didn't seem to care. He stuck to his routines. Morning patrols around the yard, afternoon naps by the stove, evening walks with Annie bundled beside him, mitten swinging from her wrist. And then, on the 7th day, he disappeared again. This time, he left a trail. Carol found the first clue, a torn scrap of flannel from the bandana she used to tie around his neck. It was on the back porch, folded under a stone. I followed boot prints down the trail behind the barn and into the woods. They weren't deep, which meant he'd walked slow. Purposeful. At the base of the ridge, I found the second clue. A pine cone. Tucked inside, another note. Crude, messy handwriting. A child's. "Max is showing me the place. The real place. I had a dream. He woke me up." Annie. I ran back to the cabin. She wasn't in her bed. Her boots were gone. Carol's hands flew to her mouth. "She didn't?" "She did." Donovan was at the cabin within 15 minutes. We packed gear and flashlights and radios and hit the trail with snowshoes. Jacob stayed behind with Carol. His injuries were still healing, and running through the forest wasn't an option. We followed Max's trail past the ridge, into the deeper woods, places I hadn't ventured since I was young. An hour passed, then 2. Then we heard the barking. Sharp. Repeated. We followed it. And found them. Max was standing at the entrance to a sinkhole, an old collapse from a forgotten mine shaft, hidden beneath a blanket of snow and roots. Annie was seated on a log nearby, cheeks flushed, but eyes alert. "He showed me," she said, "in my dream. Then I woke up and he was already at the door." Donovan swept the area, then looked down the hole. "Smell that?" he asked. "Chemical." We rigged a harness and descended. What we found was beyond anything we'd imagined. Barrels. Dozens of them. Rusted, marked with Kelridge codes. Buried in the walls. Some cracked, some leaking. Photographs wouldn't be enough. We needed samples. Evidence. We returned with gear the next day. State agents. Scientists. Environmental crews in hazmat suits. The story exploded. Everything Jacob claimed was true. Every piece of evidence led to more. The mine shaft was a dumping site disguised by years of lies and payoffs. But through it all, Max never left Annie's side. When the TV crews came, she told the story again and again. How he woke her up, how he led her through the snow, how he never stopped watching the trees, and how, in the end, He found the one thing they'd all missed. Because he wasn't just following trails, he was leading us home. Even now, I don't think we understand how deep it all went. But Max did. He always did. That night, as the agents packed up samples and the last of the barrels were logged for transport, I stood by the fire pit in front of the cabin. Max came up beside me and sat. I looked down at him. "You think it's done?" He didn't move, just looked up. And I knew we weren't there yet. But we were close. And as long as Max kept walking forward, we'd follow. They called him a tracking dog on the news, like he was trained for this. That's what Annie said as she watched Max trot across the field outside the cabin, nose to the ground and tail waving like a flag. Her voice wasn't angry, but there was a curl to her lip, a little quiver in the words. Not from sadness. From something else. Pride, maybe, mixed with the frustration of someone watching the world try to shrink something bigger than it understood. "He's not trained," she said again, this time more to herself. "He just knows." It had been a week since they uncovered the barrels in the sinkhole. Since then, the world had come crashing down around Kelridge. News vans camped near the edge of the woods. Politicians made speeches in front of the town hall. Scientists tested everything from water to tree bark. And a parade of lawyers arrived in town like crows, sensing something dead and valuable. Jacob stayed indoors most days, reading the official reports that now bore his name as the original whistleblower. Donovan spent every waking hour coordinating security with state authorities, and Carol had taken over the kitchen like a general, feeding anyone who showed up at the door with the right intentions and a weary look in their eyes. But Annie, she watched Max. She followed him. Drew him. Wrote little stories in a notebook about his adventures, each one ending the same way, with him standing proudly under the stars, guarding something that mattered. That morning, he found something again. It started with a single bark. Short, sharp. He was near the shed, nose buried in a pile of half-rotted firewood. Annie ran to him first. By the time I got there, she was already on her knees, helping him dig. "Something's buried," she said, voice quick. I dropped to my knees beside them and helped clear the slush and dirt. There, under 2 layers of old tarp, was a metal lockbox. Rusted. Heavy. "Did you hide this?" I asked her. She shook her head. "No, and I've never seen Max look at something like that before." Donovan arrived minutes later, drawn by the noise. He crouched over the box, turning it in his gloved hands. No markings, but the padlock's newer than the box. He cut it open with bolt cutters from the truck. Inside, papers. Dozens of them. But not like the others. These weren't technical records or shipment manifests. These were internal memos, notes between executives, threat assessments, personal details about people who had interfered with Kelridge's expansion, names of journalists, inspectors, even officials marked as to be influenced. Donovan read silently for a few minutes, then stood slowly. "This is the kill list," he said. Not literally, but close. We brought the box inside and called Avery. He was back in Albany, buried under grand jury paperwork. But when he heard what we'd found, his voice sharpened. "Secure it," he said. "Double copies. I'll send a courier." So we did. 2 sets of scans, burned onto drives, locked in separate safes, one buried under the cabin floor, one taken into town by Donovan himself. That night, Carol made cornbread and stew. We all sat around the fireplace, the warmth pushing away the cold knot that had crept into our bones since the day began. Max lay curled near Annie, head resting on her foot. He knew, Jacob said. He always knew. Dogs like him don't just find things, Donovan added. They lead you to them when you're ready. I didn't say much that evening, just watched the logs burn down and listened to the wind shift outside. Because I had a feeling Max wasn't done yet. The next morning, we got confirmation. Avery called. There's going to be a pushback, he said. They know it's slipping away, and the people involved have more to lose than just money. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're going to try something. Desperate. Sure enough, later that day, the phone lines to the cabin went down. Then the power. Then the backup generator failed. No storm. No obvious cause. Just silence and darkness. Jacob checked the lines. They'd been cut. We lit lanterns and set up old battery-powered radios. Donovan stayed with us that night, shotgun resting across his knees. Max didn't sleep. He stood by the front door for hours, nose lifted slightly, breathing deep. At one point, he growled. Low, steady. Nothing came. Not that night. But the next morning, Annie found the prints. Near the woodpile. Boot tracks. Deep. Leading up to the back of the house and then vanishing into the woods. Someone was here, she whispered. Donovan confirmed it. 3 pairs. Different sizes. They circled the cabin. Jacob looked at me. We can't just wait. No, I said. We move first. We set traps, cameras, warning systems. Max helped, digging, sniffing, pulling at branches where scent lingered. That evening, Annie stayed inside. Carol baked 2 pies, one for the table, one to leave by the window. She said, just in case we need to bargain with ghosts. Around midnight, the trap went off. An alarm by the shed. Donovan and I were out the door in seconds. Max lunged ahead. We found the man tangled in wire, face down in the snow, cursing. Donovan pulled him up, weapon ready. Who are you? He demanded. The man sneered. They said it'd be easy. They were wrong. By sunrise, state troopers had him in custody. His phone had messages from a burner number traced back to a Kelridge-connected address. He'd been paid to scout, to break in, to take what he could. He never got past the edge of the yard. Because Max was watching. The news caught wind of it the next day. Headlines called it an attempted breach, but we knew what it really was. Desperation. Kelridge's final clause, slipping. That afternoon, we got another call from Avery. The grand jury is ready. Testimony starts in 3 days. I want you there. Jacob agreed. And bring the dog, Avery added. If he's up for it. Max looked up from his place by the fire. Didn't move. Didn't wag. Just watched. He was always ready. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. But we used the time. Annie wrote her full story, start to finish, about the snow, the cabin, the note, the rescue, the mittens, the trails, and the truth. Jacob rehearsed his testimony. Carol made sandwiches and packed thermoses. Donovan prepped his reports. I cleaned Max's collar. And when we left that morning, headed toward Albany, he climbed into the back seat without hesitation. Tail curled, eyes forward, because this wasn't just a trip to court. This was the road to the end of a long trail. And Max? He knew exactly where it would lead. He didn't bark once during the whole thing, not even when the cameras started flashing. That was the first thing I told Carol when we got back from Albany. It had been a whirlwind, courtrooms, security lines, interviews, all of it wrapped around a week that felt like a lifetime. And through it all, Max had been right there, steady, silent, watchful. The courthouse was a big, gray thing with polished stone steps and doors that swung wide with the weight of truth or lies. There were guards with radios and lawyers with suitcases, and somewhere above it all, a clock tower that told the hour like it was warning the world to stay honest. Max didn't flinch once. He walked beside Annie like he was born for it, didn't pull at the leash, didn't get distracted. When we passed the crowd of reporters at the gate, he simply looked straight ahead and kept moving. Inside, Jacob gave his testimony. Donovan gave his report. Even I answered a few questions as a character witness and caretaker of key evidence. But it was Annie who brought the room to a hush. She took the stand in her Sunday dress, the one Carol had ironed that morning with a hand that trembled just a bit. Her voice was clear. Her hands didn't shake. She told them about the cabin, the storm, the note in the mitten, and Max, how he found help, how he knew where to go, how he saved her father. And when the lawyer asked if she thought Max understood what was happening, she nodded. "I think he knows when someone needs to be found," she said, "and I think he knows who's worth trusting." It wasn't theatrical. There were no tears, just the quiet strength of a child who had seen too much and survived it with the help of a dog who didn't need words to be heroic. The jury listened. The press took notes. And Max? He sat at her feet the entire time, head high, tail still, eyes on the door like he was waiting for something just outside the frame. Later, during a break, one of the bailiffs offered him a treat. Max sniffed it once and turned his head. Annie smiled. "He doesn't take food from people he doesn't know." The bailiff chuckled. "Smart dog." By the end of the week, preliminary hearings were complete. The charges against Kelridge executives were piling up like cordwood: fraud, environmental violations, tampering, threats. At least 4 people were indicted that Friday alone, with more expected. We didn't stay for the full storm. Avery told us to go home, to let the state handle the rest. "You've done more than enough," he said. "Now it's our turn." So, we drove back that Saturday. The sun was just starting to break through the clouds when the cabin came into view. Carol was on the porch. She waved. Annie waved back. And Max, he jumped from the back seat, ran across the yard, and bounded up the porch steps like he hadn't aged a day. For the first time in weeks, he barked. Just once. Loud, clear, triumphant. That night, the cabin was full again. Jacob sat with Carol at the table, talking like old friends. Donovan helped me fix the last of the busted fence posts. Annie curled up in the chair by the fire, with Max's head in her lap. We didn't talk much that evening. We just listened. To the wind, to the fire, to the quiet that only comes when something hard has passed. But the peace didn't last long. 2 days later, someone set fire to the Kelridge storage facility on the east side of town. It was old, abandoned, but it still held records. The kind of records people might want gone. Donovan was called in first, then state police, then federal investigators. "It's retaliation," he said when he came back to the cabin. "Or maybe a warning. Either way, someone doesn't want us celebrating just yet." Jacob frowned. "Think they'll come for the cabin?" Donovan hesitated. "I don't know, but we should be ready." That night, we checked locks, reinforced windows. Max did his rounds twice. Carol cooked extra just in case someone needed comfort food more than once. The next morning, Annie handed me a new drawing. It was Max, standing between the cabin and a shadow, his eyes glowing yellow, his tail straight, his stance wide. "He's not done yet," she said. I believed her. Later that week, another letter arrived. Not a threat, not a bribe. A thank you. From a former Kelridge employee. Someone who had seen what was happening and didn't know what to do. The letter included a map, marked with 4 red X's. "Sites," Donovan said. "Other dumping zones." We sent the info to Avery. He confirmed the locations matched flagged GPS records from Kelridge-owned trucks. Max sat at the edge of the porch as we talked, watching the horizon. "You think he wants to go?" Jacob asked. I looked at him. "No, I think he knows we'll go." So he's waiting. The next morning, before the sun was fully up, Max woke me, nose to my hand, eyes steady. I dressed quietly. Carol didn't stir. Annie was asleep. Jacob was still snoring. We headed into the woods. He led me through a path I hadn't taken in years, not since I was a boy. Over streams, past hollow logs, through brambles. And then he stopped, at the edge of a clearing. The air smelled wrong. I dropped to my knees, dug with my gloves. 5 minutes in, I hit something hard. Plastic. Wrapped. Labeled. Another barrel. He sat beside it, quiet. Watching. "You found another one?" I whispered. He didn't move. Didn't need to. The next day, the agents arrived, dug it up, confirmed the contents. Hazardous waste, improperly sealed. We marked the coordinates, added it to the file. Max didn't celebrate. He didn't even wag. He just watched until they took it away. Then turned and led me home. When we reached the yard, Annie was waiting. "You found another one?" I nodded. She knelt and hugged Max. "You're not a tracking dog," she whispered. "You're a guardian." He licked her cheek. That night, the fire burned low. The stars were bright. Max lay in front of the door, eyes open, ears twitching at every sound, because even when the fighting was done, he stayed ready, just in case someone else needed to be found. He's slowing down. That's what Annie whispered one morning, her hand resting gently on Max's back as he lay in front of the fireplace, chest rising and falling in the long rhythm of a dog who'd run through more winters than anyone thought possible. His paws twitched in his sleep, like he was chasing something far off in a dream. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was memory. Annie looked at me with eyes that had grown older since the snowstorm, since the mitten, since the sinkhole. "Is he okay?" "He's tired," I said. "But he's all right. Dogs like Max don't stop until the job's done." She nodded. What if the job's never done? I didn't have an answer to that. We had been living in a strange sort of calm. Kelridge had all but collapsed. Executives faced trials. Former employees turned whistleblowers were testifying, and cleanup efforts expanded by the day. The sinkhole was cordoned off by environmental crews. The quarry was sealed. The cabin, once a quiet place for retirement, had become a headquarters of sorts, though we never asked for the role. The news vans came less often. The reporters stopped calling. But the letters didn't. Dozens came in, handwritten notes from strangers, emails printed by the boxful, photos of other dogs wearing Max's picture on t-shirts or pinned to collars. One letter came from a young girl in Iowa. She wrote, "My dog doesn't listen to me, but I told him about Max, and now he tries harder. Annie smiled at that one for a long time. Jacob had been speaking publicly, now that his name was cleared. He had no interest in politics, but his words carried weight. People listened when he said the truth wasn't always convenient, but it was always right. Carol returned to gardening. Her tomatoes were late this year, but she said the soil finally smelled clean again. And Max? Max spent more time sitting in the yard than chasing through it. His coat still shone. His eyes still held that old fire. But he moved slower, watched longer. One evening, just after dinner, we heard a car roll up the gravel path. Max lifted his head first, then stood up. Annie followed him to the door. It was Avery. He looked tired, but relieved. "Thought I'd come in person," he said, stepping inside. "It's official. They've settled. Fines, sanctions, permanent closures, no appeal." Jacob stepped forward. "The land? Designated for restoration. Long-term, publicly monitored. Your name's on the agreement, Jacob. You too, Annie." Annie blinked. "Me?" "You're listed as an honorary environmental steward," Avery said with a smile. "The state thought it was fitting. You and Max." She turned to Max and threw her arms around his neck. He stood still, accepting the hug like it was something sacred. Avery glanced at me. "There's more. A foundation. They want to start one in his name. Fund rescue efforts, trail search dogs, community education, all centered on what one dog did." I looked down at Max. I think he'd like that. Avery stayed for coffee. Carol made apple pie. It was almost like we'd gone back to the start. Back before the snow, before the note, before the fire, and the fear, and the sleepless nights, almost. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I sat on the porch with Max beside me. "Do you remember it all?" I asked. He didn't move. "I don't mean the woods, or the barrels, or the court. I mean her. Annie. The mitten. The message tied to your tail. Do you remember how it started?" He looked out into the trees, and I realized he hadn't just been guarding the cabin all these weeks. He'd been making sure she'd never need to send another message again. The next morning, Max didn't get up. His eyes opened when Annie knelt beside him. He licked her hand once, then closed them again. Jacob helped me carry him. We wrapped him in Annie's favorite quilt, the one she used to drag behind her through the hallways, the one with stars sewn along the edges. We buried him at the edge of the woods, where the snow first started that day months ago, where I thought he was a log, where everything changed. Annie placed her mitten beside the grave. "He can carry it wherever he goes." We said a few words. Carol cried softly. Jacob stood with his hand on Annie's shoulder. I didn't say much. I couldn't. That night I found Annie's notebook open on the table. She'd written a new story. It started, "The dog who knew where the truth was hidden didn't need a leash or a voice. He just needed someone to follow." The last line read, "Some heroes carry flashlights, some carry handcuffs. Mine carried a mitten." There's still work to do. Cleanup crews still come through. Lawyers still argue over settlements. Jacob still gives interviews. Annie still writes. But something's changed. There's a quiet around the cabin now that isn't heavy. It's gentle, grateful. And sometimes, when the wind picks up just right, it sounds like a bark in the distance. I still leave the porch light on some nights, just in case another dog finds his way to our door, just in case someone else ties hope to a tail. Because after everything that happened, after the snowstorm, the sinkhole, the fire, the courtroom, I still believe one thing. Sometimes a dog isn't just a companion. Sometimes He's a message. And if you're lucky enough to understand it, you follow.